Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In the preceding section, we created a macro by recording. It was a useful little macro to print at level 1 the current schedule for a project. Note we recorded using version 05 of the house build project, but it should in fact work in any other project as well. So it might be a good idea for you to give it a try at some stage and see if it works in one of the other projects, maybe even in one of your own projects. Now, I'm aware of one little issue with it, which I will show you how to overcome. And there's another issue which is not quite so obvious, but is typical of the sort of thing that comes to light when you've been using macros for a while, and certainly something that's seen to be doing the right job seems to be doing the wrong job. And I'll come back to that later on. The first thing I want to look at though is the macro that we created. Now on the View tab, I can go to the Macros button right on the end and click View Macros. And you can see there in the list the one that we created, so DA Print Current Status. And I'm going to straight away click on the Edit button. And what you can now see is called the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications, or the Vba Window. And when you're working on VBA, it's sort of an environment within project. The way that it works is quite different because we're back into an older style application where instead of a ribbon, we're back to having that kind of old school menu system, which some of you might remember from older versions of the Microsoft applications. So it does take a little bit of getting used to if you're primarily used to using ribbon type applications now. But this is the VBA window. I'm going to take you on a very quick tour of the window, and then we're going to talk about the macro that we created in the preceding section. Now the biggest window here we normally call the code window, and within the code window we have our macro. So you can see here it begins with sub, and then we have the name of the macro. And that's got a couple of round brackets on the end. And that macro goes on to end sub at the end. And I'm going to talk about that more in a moment. Now subs stand for subroutines, which are actually held in what we call VBA modules. And a module can contain no subs, one sub, or in fact any number of subs. Now let's take a tour around the rest of the VBA window. So the window on the top left is referred to as the Project Explorer. You can see here I have Project Global, so the global template listed at the top. And underneath I have a list of open projects. So let me make that a little bit wider. So you can see that I have a few different project files open at the moment, but the one that we're concerned with is House Build 05. So if I click the plus next to there, just to expand that, we can see my project file underneath. So now I'm clicked on my project, you can see below this little project properties window, and that's just there. Sometimes you might need to look at the properties of a particular macro or particular project, and you can see those down there. These may not mean too much to you at the moment, so don't worry too much about those. Now we're not going to go into this in any great detail on this course. I just really want to introduce you to the general concepts of editing macros. And what we're looking at here is just this first macro, and we're going to turn our attention now to this code. And I'm going to explain to you step by step what it does and how it works. Now I've already explained sub and end sub, and what you have immediately after sub are two lines that begin with a single apostrophe, a single quote, and they're showing in green, and this indicates that those two lines are comments. So they actually have no effect on the functionality of the macro. They're there purely for information. So this might be the description of what the macro does. I don't know if you remember in the previous module when we set up this macro, I didn't add a description, I just left the default, which is what we're seeing just here. So this is why it's quite useful to add a description, because when you come into the code, it will tell you exactly what this macro actually does. So these have no effect on the actual functionality of the macro, purely comments. Now the important point here is that those comment lines are not processed in any way by VBA. So it's not expecting to have to do anything, it pretty much ignores those. They're in the code, but as I said, they're purely there to help humans if you like to read about that particular piece of code and understand what it's doing. The next lines though are all executable Vba code, and one or two of those lines of code are actually going to be pretty easy to understand. For instance, the second line there where it says table apply, name equals ampersand work. Now I think even if you haven't looked at program code before, you'll have a pretty good idea what that does, because what we're doing is applying the work table. And if I asked you to apply the cost table instead in VBA, you could probably even work out what the command to do that would look like. So we might go into here and just replace the word work with cost. But the commands are executed in sequence, so let's start with the first one, this line just here. Now you might be able to make a pretty good guess at this as well. So it says view apply X, name equals Gantt chart, apply to equals 0. Now there's one or two funny things in there, like the apply to equals 0. And with some of these commands, although some of it may be quite intuitive, some of it is a bit head scratchy really. You look and you wonder, well, I don't know what that does. And this is where Vba Help comes in. So it's a separate help system to project, and it can be a huge help when you're working in VBA. It has thousands and thousands of pieces of information in it, and when you first start writing VBA code, you'll probably refer to it a lot. So let's just go back to our view apply X and see what that actually means. So I'm going to click on help and open up the help, and you'll see in the top corner we have a search. So I'm going to click search, and I'm just going to type view apply X and click on search. And I'm going to click this top option here, and we can scroll down and we can read a little bit more. So let's go down to this apply to values. So we can see here value 0, 1, 4, 5. Let's just refer back to our project window again. So you can see in this line of code we have apply to equals 0. And if we look at this table, it says apply to value 0, primary, usually the top pane of a split view. So essentially the value of 0 means that apply to equals 0, which is what we have, means apply Gantt chart view to the only pane available. Now if we had a split view at this time and we wanted to apply Gantt chart view to the lower pane, the bottom pane, we would have put apply to, and then we would have used the 1 option, the secondary pane. So as you can see, that help can be really, really helpful when you're trying to figure out what some of this code means. So essentially this first line of code is saying apply Gantt chart and apply it to the pane that's available, the only pane. Now we've already talked about the second command where we apply the work table. That's fairly straightforward. And in fact, the third line of code is also pretty straightforward as well. But again, you could refer to Vba Help if you wanted to get a bit granular on exactly what this is doing. But by looking at this, it's saying outline show tasks, outline number, and then we have PJ task outline show level 1. So essentially what we're doing there is showing the outline level 1 tasks. Again, fairly easy to work out even if you don't have a lot of VBA knowledge. So imagine if, for the sake of this exercise, we wanted to change this so that it applies outline level 2, we could just come into here and modify this to show level 2 instead. The next line of code, zoom timescale entire equals true. If you remember, we wanted to put the entire project in view, so we clicked on the entire project button. And that's exactly what that is doing there. It's saying zoom timescale for the entire project. And then finally, we have edit copy picture. So if you remember, we created that GIF image file, and that's what we have here. So it's saying copy picture, and then we have some parameters which we set. So if you remember, when we copied the image, we had a whole bunch of options that we could select, whether we wanted to select rows, whether it's for the printer or the screen, so on and so forth, and also what the to and from dates were. And that's what all of these conditions are in here. So again, it's fairly straightforward to work out what this macro is actually doing, and you could come in here and make some really meaningful adjustments to get that macro to work how you want. Now, if you remember, I said I'm going to add something into this code which is going to suppress that overwrite existing file message. And again, it's very simple to do. I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm just going to add a line of code which says application.alerts false. And that will actually suppress any alerts that pop up on the screen. So again, a very simple line of code to add in there. And I'm also going to make some of those other changes that we talked about. So I'm going to say apply the cost table instead. So I can just come in here and say cost. I'm going to say show outline level 2, like so. So very simply, I've made some edits to this macro. I can then go in and save my edits to the global.mpt file. And then when I run the macro, I'm going to get a slightly different result based on the edits that I've made. So let's close this down. Let's go to macros, view macros, and I'm going to run. And there we go, we get a slightly different view. So now we have the cost table applied, we have 2 levels showing, and it will have created that GIF file in the folder that I've specified, and it's still zooming to the entire project. Hopefully that shows you how easy it is to make some basic edits to a macro. And this is a whole huge topic that you could explore all day if you wanted to. And as I said, we do have a VBA course on Simon Says It if you are interested in this and interested in learning more complex ways of creating macros to automate your work. However, that's the end of this section. I will see you in the next.